I'm Ham Radio Dude, and this is my dog, Chuck. I've been teaching Chuck all kinds of stuff since I got him 2.5 years ago, like sit and lay down, and I even tried to teach him how to cook.
Chicken's raw again.
Now, Chuck's a great dog, and not just that, he's my best friend. I'd love to take him to go out and do more stuff with me. I'm determined to find something that Chuck is good at, and I would love for him to be able to maybe go do a park on the air activation with me and help me out. But we face a couple issues when it comes to a dog trying to call CQ. Number one, my dog's English is pretty bad. Hey, you want to do parks on the air, bud? And number two, we have an issue where my dog doesn't know exactly how to hit the push to talk button correctly for some stupid reason, like he doesn't have any dexterity. I could just make a project box with a single button on it, which when pressed would activate either a voice or a CW memory internal to the Yaesu FT891. But the problem with that is, my dog, he always forgets the cable. So today we're going to open up the Yaesu FT891 and we're going to install a button on top of the radio. This button will allow us to activate those same memories, and we can still use the RAM port on the back of the radio. The original schematic for Yaesu FH2 is similar to the one that you see above, but we're going to cut most of this out. In order to do this project, we're going to need 4 things. We're going to need a push button, we're going to need an 820R and a 47R resistor, which when ran in series is a 867R resistor, and then we're going to need a capacitor and a bunch of wire. Step 1 is to remove the 4 screws on the top of the radio. Step 2 is to remove the front faceplate of the radio and then remove the 4 screws inside of the front faceplate. After removing the microphone cable as well as the front faceplate extension cable, we're going to go ahead then and remove that front faceplate as well as the top cover of the radio. Once inside, we are going to remove a few cables. The cables that you're going to remove should be removed very carefully, but also just keep in mind of where things were removed. You'll see some very small cables on here, and they should be removed because we're going to have to take this board apart. The ribbon cable as well as the wires that we're going to remove should come off fairly easily. Don't force them, but I also want to mention here that this probably voids your warranty. Don't void your warranty. Once those cables are removed, remove the main screws that are holding down this board. Initially, I had done this step first, and then I took the cables off or the wires off. However, it doesn't matter the order you do them in, just make sure you do remove all the screws to include the one that you see right now that I'm working on. The speaker is held in by rubber and it should just pull off fairly easily. Remove the board from the radio, and I do want to make a note here that in this process I removed the DSP from the radio, as you can see in the upper right hand side of the screen. There's no need to remove the DSP from the radio. With the board out and upside down, we're going to find the REM port on the radio, and we're going to solder 2 traces under the REM port, one to the ground and one to the tip. It's simply going to be the left and the right, but if you were wondering, all you'd have to do is take a multimeter to the internal portion of the REM port, as well as those solder points until you find the ground and the tip. Take the 2 wires or traces that you made and fish them through the speaker port. Next, place your board back onto the chassis and place your ribbons and your wires back into the correct spots. And you could also go ahead now and screw in all those screws that you removed from the chassis. Next, locate a spot that you could actually place this button without the button hitting the circuit board or any of the components around, as you don't want to short anything out. I needed to use a big button because my dog's paw was not going to be able to hit a small button. In this case, I did find a spot, and after measuring, I went ahead and I drilled a hole with a step bit. Next, go ahead and add the button onto the case that you just drilled the hole in. You'll notice that I bent the pins on here in order to not have it touch the circuit board, but after further investigation, I just added 2 nuts into the whole button combination with the case. That gives it a better spacing. Now we have the REM wired up. We have the wires coming to the top portion of the radio, and we have a hole drilled for our button. I'm going to get into how you can make more in just a moment, but I want to draw out what I showed you earlier, and that's what are we looking at here? Well, you have some resistors, and those are really poor resistors, but one has 820R value, and the other one has a 47R value, which equals 867R, okay? Now, you have a button with two prongs. We're going to call this prong 1 and prong 2, okay? And then, off of prong 2, we have a wire that goes, and essentially it goes out to the REM port, as well as the wire from prong 1 goes out to the REM port. But in between the two here, after the resistors, we have a capacitor right here. We're just going to call this a cap, okay? So, these aren't official schematics, I understand that, but what we recognize is when we press this button here, we are sending a signal to the radio, and the radio is saying, I see the resistance value of 867. I'm supposed to activate memory channel 1 for the voice activation or for the CW activation. And so then you let go, and you could do it again, you could do it again. Now, I do have something else coming up in the future where it's automated, but for now, when the value is past of 867, it knows to activate memory channel 1, provided you've enabled everything on the radio. What is this capacitor doing? And that's a question I have. I want you to let me know in the comments below if I'm correct in this, but I believe that this capacitor running between the two prongs, or the positive and negative, if you'll call it that, is basically acting as a semi-noise suppressant, possibly for the two different, for the radio. So basically, if the noise is kind of feedback looping in, maybe the capacitor is building up that energy so no noise is displayed in this circuit. But please let me know about the capacitor. I understand the resistors, and my dog really wants to know about that. And I know I told you that you just needed some resistors, a capacitor, and wire, but again, you could do it that way if you just want to twist these together, solder, your resistors together, and then, of course, your resistor to your button. Take your capacitor, cross it here, and then have a wire that goes to the capacitor and, again, out to the REM port. That would be fine. It would look kind of something like this. And I know that's really poor, but really, you got your resistor going to the button. You got the capacitor side going to I call it the capacitor side, going to the button. You have your capacitor going in between the two, and then out to your REM wire, as well as out to your REM wire. So it's not that difficult. Maybe an easier way, though, and a way I originally wanted to do it was going to be kind of like with a board like this. And the reason for that was I could use smaller buttons, and I could probably fit 3 or 4 buttons on here, and then I would just drill holes for the buttons and screw this into the top, so I would have 3 buttons to activate. Again, that was the original plan, but the dog, he can't hit 3 buttons. He can't hit one of the single 3 buttons because they were so small. So a big button's the way to go. And with that, too, it's a lot easier to use these prototype boards, if you will, to go ahead and just kind of put your resistors in, solder them, and then make your own traces. Whether or not you do choose to use a little circuit board, and you could even cut part of it off now, after you get your traces to your buttons, which will be over here, don't forget your traces that would come from the REM port. You're probably going to want to do something like, I don't know, put some heat shrink on here and then heat shrink it closed. And the reason for that is, or tight. You could then use double tape and put this on top of the case, but also you don't really have to worry about anything grounding out then because it's all internal to the heat shrink. Somebody's getting impatient. Regardless of what way you decide, the key is ensuring you don't short anything out. But now we can go ahead, after we get everything installed, we can put the case back together and we could test some things out. So let's do that. Now that I got everything roughly back together, I also did the power pull mod while I was in the radio. But we're just going to turn this on here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this button's working as it should. So when I hit this, I should hear... W9FFF. I do. I hear my... Perfect. I hear my call sign. But now we also want to make sure that it's still going to work with our FH2 or our FH2 knockoff. And by the way, I'm not transmitting. I have this on voice playback only. Here we are now. I'm in the REM port and...
W9FFF. CQ parked on the air. CQ. W9.
Cool. They both work, and they both work simultaneously, so...
W9. W9.
Awesome. And again, if you wanted to have more buttons, smaller buttons and maybe even have them lined up here, you could, and just have the different resistant values. All right, now's the time to see if we can get Chuck to call CQ. Right here. Right here. I need you to press this.
W9FFF.
Good boy, okay? Button. Chuck, button.
W9FFF.
Good button, good button. Button.
W9FFF.
Good button. Chuck, button. Almost.
W9FFF.
Yes, you got it, dude. Good job, you called CQ, good boy. One more time, button. Come on, button. Yes, you got it, button.
W9FFF.
Yes, you got it. It is official, my dog can call CQ. That was a fun episode, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I want to give a huge shout out to this month's channel members, which you see listed around me. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you at the next meeting. I appreciate your support. Whee!